Cheltenham, August 1817. In Laura Place, the morning sun drew long, sharp shadows, as defined as the line that now divided Miss Rosalind Templeton's life into before and after. With trembling fingers pressed against her abdomen, she willed away a nausea that was both physical and existential. 3 months had passed since that night in the cottage. 3 months since Lord Nathaniel Stratford had whispered promises of eternal devotion and disappeared into the dawn, leaving behind only the fading scent of bergamot and the growing evidence of her ruin. Standing before her aunt's drawing-room window, Rosalind watched fashionable society promenade past, their world untouched by the catastrophe unfolding within her own body. At 19, with her modest dowry of £2,000 and her late father's respectable naval career as her only credentials, she had been precisely the sort of innocent prey that rakes like Nathaniel hunted with practiced ease. The letter clutched in her hand bore the Stratford family crest, but it was not from Nathaniel. It was a formal notice that Lord Nathaniel Stratford had departed for an extended continental tour and would not be receiving correspondence. The words blurred before her eyes as the full weight of her abandonment settled like lead in her chest. If stories of redemption through unexpected sacrifice move your heart, subscribe now and stay with us. You will not want to miss what unfolds next. Rosalind? Her aunt's voice cut through the morning stillness. Mrs. Georgiana Marlbury stood in the doorway, her sharp eyes missing nothing. Not the pallor of Rosalind's complexion, nor the way her niece's hand rested protectively over her stomach. We must speak. The conversation that followed stripped away the last of Rosalind's illusions. Her aunt had suspected the truth for weeks, had made discreet inquiries, and had learned what polite society whispered but never spoke aloud, that Lord Nathaniel Stratford, second son of the Duke of Ashcroft, was a practiced seducer with a trail of ruined reputations behind him. There is only one course of action, Mrs. Marlbury pronounced, her voice tight with controlled fury. You must go to London, you must find him, and demand he honor his promises, false though they were. If he will not marry you, then at the very least, he must provide for the child. He said we were married, Rosalind whispered, shame burning in her throat. In the cottage, with candles and flowers. He read from what I thought was a prayer book. A pretty fiction, nothing more. Her aunt's expression softened marginally. Men like Nathaniel Stratford are skilled in the art of deception, but his family is another matter. The Stratfords are proud, ancient nobility. They will not wish this scandal attached to their name. 3 days later, Rosalind found herself on the coach to London, her small reticule containing the last of her pin money and a single address, Stratford House, Grosvenor Square. The journey passed in a blur of anxiety and mounting dread. What would she say? How did one approach a family of such elevated rank and demand recompense for seduction? London greeted her with its usual indifference, a vast, churning mass of humanity and commerce that swallowed up one ruined girl without notice. She hired a hackney to convey her to Grosvenor Square, her heart hammering so violently she feared it might burst through her bodice. Stratford House rose before her like a monument to everything she was not: wealth, power, unassailable respectability. The Portland stone facade gleamed in the afternoon sun, its windows reflecting clouds and sky with aristocratic detachment. Rosalind paid the driver with trembling hands and stepped down onto the pavement. It was then that fate intervened. Rosalind, distracted by rehearsing her speech to the butler, failed to notice the gentleman descending the front steps at precisely the same moment. They collided with enough force to send her reticule flying and nearly knock her off her feet. Strong hands caught her shoulders, steadying her. "Forgive me, I was not—" The words died in her throat as she looked up into the face of Lord Nathaniel Stratford. Except it was not Nathaniel. She knew that instantly, though every physical feature matched. The aristocratic nose, the strong jaw, the slate-gray eyes beneath dark brows. But these eyes held none of Nathaniel's practiced charm. Instead, they regarded her with serious intensity, a vertical line of concern appearing between them. "Are you injured?" The voice was deeper than Nathaniel's, rougher at the edges, stripped of that honeyed cadence that had once made her heart flutter. Rosalind stumbled backward, her mind reeling. "You are not. That is, I thought—" Adrian Stratford, Marquis of Highgate. He bent to retrieve her scattered belongings with quiet efficiency. "And you are clearly seeking someone at this address. My brother, perhaps." The kindness in his tone, so utterly different from what she expected, shattered the last of Rosalind's composure. "Lord Nathaniel promised to marry me," she heard herself say, the words tumbling out in a desperate rush. "He said we were married. There was a ceremony, or I thought there was, and now I am." She pressed a hand to her mouth, horrified by her own candor. Adrian Stratford's face underwent a transformation. The concern hardened into something colder, more dangerous. His jaw tightened, and when he spoke again, his voice carried a weight that made her shiver despite the warmth of the day. "Come inside," he said quietly. "This is not a conversation for the street." The interior of Stratford House overwhelmed her senses. Marble floors polished to mirror brightness, paintings by old masters lining walls papered in silk damask, the scent of beeswax and expensive flowers filling the air. Adrian led her not to a formal receiving room, but to what appeared to be his private study, a masculine space of leather-bound books and dark wood paneling. He gestured her to a chair upholstered in forest green velvet and poured her a glass of Madeira without asking if she wanted it. "Drink," he commanded gently. "You have had a shock." Rosalind obeyed, the sweet wine burning its way down her throat and settling warmly in her stomach. She watched him over the rim of the glass, noting how he paced before the fireplace with barely contained fury. "How long ago?" Adrian asked abruptly. "The night—" Rosalind's voice cracked. "May 17th. At a cottage near Prior Park, outside Bath. He said it was his family's property. He said the man who performed the ceremony was his family's private chaplain. There is no cottage near Prior Park belonging to this family." Adrian's voice was flat, devoid of emotion. "There is no private chaplain who would perform such a ceremony without proper license and bans. My brother has perfected the art of creating elaborate fictions to serve his pleasures." The clinical assessment of her ruin made Rosalind flinch. "I was not. That is, I did not think myself foolish or naive. You were 19 years old and an orphan." Adrian turned to face her fully, and she saw that his eyes had softened again. "My brother is 8 and 20 and has spent a decade learning how to exploit exactly such vulnerabilities. The fault is not yours, Miss Templeton. Rosalind Templeton. My father was Captain Henry Templeton of the Royal Navy." Something shifted in Adrian's expression. Recognition, perhaps, or respect for the name. "Captain Templeton was a hero at Trafalgar. I remember reading the dispatches." The unexpected acknowledgement of her father's service brought tears to Rosalind's eyes. "He would be so ashamed of me now." "He would be ashamed of my brother," Adrian corrected firmly. "Not of you." "Tell me, Miss Templeton, you are with child?" The directness of the question should have scandalized her, but Rosalind found herself grateful for his forthrightness. "Yes, 3 months gone, perhaps slightly more. My aunt suspects. Soon everyone will know." Adrian resumed his pacing, his hands clasped behind his back in a gesture that suggested intense thought. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the ticking of an ormolu clock on the mantelpiece and the distant sounds of London traffic beyond the windows. Finally, he stopped and turned to face her, with an expression of such resolve that Rosalind's breath caught in her throat. "There is a solution," Adrian said slowly. "It is not perfect, but it will preserve your reputation and provide for the child. I propose that we marry, Miss Templeton. By special license, immediately. We shall say that we met during the season, that our courtship was swift but proper, and that we chose to wed quietly before removing to Yorkshire. Rosalind stared at him, certain she had misheard. You cannot be serious. I am entirely serious. Adrian moved to his desk and withdrew paper and pen. I shall procure the special license today. We can be married within 3 days at Marylebone Church. I will acknowledge the child as mine. No one need ever know the truth of its parentage. But why? Rosalind whispered. You do not know me. I am nobody. This scandal is not your burden to bear. Adrian's gray eyes met hers with devastating honesty. My brother has done this before, Miss Templeton. At least twice that I know of, perhaps more. Our father has paid substantial sums to make the matter disappear. Settlements for ruined girls, payments to keep families silent. I have stood by and watched him destroy innocent lives with impunity, because challenging him would bring scandal upon our family name. He leaned forward, his hands braced on the desk between them. But this time is different. This time I can actually help, not merely throw money at the wreckage he leaves behind. You are carrying a child who bears Stratford blood, however dishonorably conceived. I can give that child legitimacy, protection, a future. And I can give you back what my brother stole, your place in society. As your wife in name only, Rosalind said softly, understanding the unspoken terms. A marriage of convenience. Precisely. Adrian's expression remained neutral, professional. I shall not force my attentions upon you, Miss Templeton. We will maintain separate chambers. You will have complete freedom to manage the household and raise the child as you see fit. I ask only that you conduct yourself with the propriety expected of a marchioness and eventually a duchess, as I am my father's heir. The offer was far more generous than anything Rosalind had dared hope for when she boarded the coach to London. Yet something in his clinical detachment made her heart ache, not for herself, but for him. What if you fall in love? She asked quietly. What if you wish to marry someone else, someone you actually choose? A shadow passed across Adrian's face, there and gone so quickly she might have imagined it. I had a near miss with matrimony 3 years ago, Miss Templeton. It taught me that passion and romance are overrated commodities. A marriage based on mutual respect and clear expectations is far more stable than one built on fleeting emotion. The memory of Lady Cecily remained a wound not fully healed. Her passionate declarations that had proven to be mere instruments of social climbing, her tears when his father refused to approve the match due to her family's financial instability. She had married a wealthier earl within 3 months. Her protestations of eternal love revealed as carefully calculated theater. A clear agreement, free from such illusions, seemed infinitely safer. There was a story there, Rosalind sensed, some wound that had not fully healed. But this was not the moment to probe such vulnerabilities. She had to think of the child growing within her, the innocent life that deserved better than the stigma of bastardy. I accept, she said, her voice steady despite the tumult in her heart. With gratitude, Lord Adrian. I will endeavor to be a wife you need not be ashamed of. The shame, Adrian said with unexpected fierceness, belongs entirely to my brother. You have done nothing wrong, Miss Templeton. Remember that. The 3 days that followed passed in a surreal blur. Adrian handled all arrangements with military precision. The special license procured through connections at Doctors' Commons, a simple wedding gown of cream silk purchased from a modiste who asked no questions, rooms secured at a respectable hotel near Marylebone where Rosalind stayed with a paid companion until the ceremony. True to his word, Adrian spread the fiction of their courtship with convincing detail. He called upon Rosalind at the hotel with flowers and books, playing the role of attentive suitor should any observers be watching. His manner remained courteous but distant, a performance designed to create the appearance of respectability while maintaining the emotional boundaries they had agreed upon. On the morning of her wedding, Rosalind stood before the mirror in her hotel room and studied her reflection. The cream silk gown was beautiful in its simplicity, embroidered with tiny seed pearls at the bodice and sleeves. Her chestnut gold hair had been dressed simply, with a few curls framing her face and a small coronet of silk flowers tucked into the arrangement. She looked like a bride. She did not feel like one. The ceremony at Marylebone Church was brief and businesslike. The vicar, an elderly man with kind eyes, seemed genuinely pleased to be uniting what he believed to be a love match. Adrian's responses were clear and firm, while Rosalind's voice trembled only slightly as she repeated her vows. When the vicar pronounced them man and wife, Adrian kissed her forehead with the same brotherly affection one might show a sister. There was nothing romantic in the gesture, nothing that suggested this was anything more than a legal contract between two pragmatic individuals. After signing the register, they emerged into the afternoon sunlight as Lord and Lady Adrian Stratford, Marquess and Marchioness of Highgate. A carriage waited to convey them to the coaching inn, where they would begin the journey north to Yorkshire and Silverton Manor, Adrian's principal estate. The journey took 3 days, with stops at coaching inns along the way. Adrian secured separate rooms at each stop, maintaining the fiction of propriety even when no one was watching. During the long hours in the carriage, they spoke little. Rosalind staring out at the changing landscape, Adrian reading correspondence or studying estate documents. Yet despite the silence, Rosalind found herself observing her new husband with growing curiosity. He was nothing like Nathaniel. Where Nathaniel had been all practiced charm and honeyed words, Adrian was reserved, almost stern in his formality. But there was kindness in him too. She saw it in the way he ensured she had every comfort, in how he instructed innkeepers to provide her with whatever she required, in the gentle courtesy he showed her even when no one else was present to observe. On the 3rd day of travel, as the carriage climbed into the Yorkshire hills, Adrian finally broke the silence. "Silverton Manor has been in my family for 6 generations, he said, his gaze fixed on the passing scenery. It is isolated. The nearest village is 3 miles distant, but I think you will find it comfortable. The staff is small but loyal. I have informed the housekeeper of our marriage and requested that the Marchioness's suite be prepared." "What did you tell them about the speed of our courtship?" Rosalind asked. "That I fell in love with you at first sight at a London ball and could not bear to wait," Adrian replied, a hint of dry humor in his voice. "They seemed to find it romantic rather than suspicious." "And when the child comes months earlier than would be expected?" "Premature births are not uncommon, particularly for first children." Adrian's tone became matter-of-fact once more. "No one will question it, especially not in the country. Society gossips, but estates this remote see little of London scandal." Silverton Manor appeared before them as the sun began its descent toward the western horizon. To Rosalind, the house was not merely magnificent, it was a fortress and a promise, salvation and imprisonment intertwined. The Palladian villa of honey-colored stone rose against the darkening sky, its facade perfectly symmetrical with columns framing the entrance like sentinels. Each pillar seemed to offer a stability she had never known, while each darkened window watched her approach like an eye, judging whether she was worthy of the sanctuary being offered. Formal gardens stretched out before it, their manicured perfection both beautiful and intimidating. Beyond them, she glimpsed parkland rolling away toward distant woods, a landscape so vast and alien to her modest upbringing that it might have been another country entirely. This was her new home, her refuge, her golden cage, all at once. The household staff assembled in the entrance hall to greet their new mistress. Mrs. Fletcher, the housekeeper, was a woman of perhaps 50 years with intelligent eyes and a capable demeanor. She curtsied to Rosalind with genuine warmth. "Welcome to Silverton Manor, your ladyship. We are delighted to have you here." "Thank you, Mrs. Fletcher." Rosalind managed what she hoped was an appropriate smile. "I look forward to learning the ways of the household." "Tomorrow will be time enough for that," Adrian interjected. "Tonight, Lady Adrian should rest after our journey." Mrs. Fletcher, please show her ladyship to her rooms." The Marchioness's suite proved to be a series of beautifully appointed chambers. A sitting room decorated in shades of rose and cream, a dressing room with wardrobes already filled with gowns Adrian had ordered made, and a bedchamber dominated by a canopied bed hung with embroidered silk. French doors opened onto a balcony overlooking the gardens. "His lordship's chambers adjoin through that door," Mrs. Fletcher indicated a door to the left. "Though, of course, you have complete privacy, my lady. The door locks from your side." The implication was clear. Adrian had instructed his staff that this was to be a conventional marriage in appearance only. Rosalind felt an unexpected pang of something she could not quite name. Gratitude, certainly, but also a strange sense of loneliness. That night, lying alone in the grand bed, Rosalind placed both hands on her abdomen where the child, Nathaniel's child, though the world would never know it, grew steadily larger. In 4 or 5 months, she would hold a baby in her arms. Adrian's generosity had given her child legitimacy, safety, a future free from shame. But what kind of life awaited them here? A marriage without love, a household built on necessary deception, a child who would grow up believing Adrian was his father when in truth, Rosalind pushed the thought away. Adrian was this child's father now, in every way that mattered. He had chosen to claim this baby as his own. That choice, she understood with sudden clarity, was worth more than any blood connection. She must make this arrangement work, for the child's sake and for Adrian's, who had sacrificed his freedom to save them both. The first weeks at Silverton Manor established the pattern that would define their marriage. Adrian rose early, breakfasted alone, and spent his days managing the estate, riding out to inspect fields and tenant farms, closeted with his steward discussing accounts, corresponding with his man of business in London regarding investments and parliamentary matters. Rosalind, meanwhile, threw herself into learning the management of a great house. Mrs. Fletcher proved an invaluable guide, teaching her the intricate dance of running a household with 15 servants, managing menus and inventories, overseeing the still room and laundry, coordinating with the gardeners and groundskeepers. They dined together each evening, formal meals served in the grand dining room where they sat at opposite ends of a table that could seat 20. Adrian inquired politely about her day. Rosalind responded with equal politeness. They discussed neutral topics, the weather, improvements needed to the estate, news from London that arrived in week-old newspapers. What they did not discuss was the growing evidence of her pregnancy, which by October had become impossible to conceal. Her gowns, cleverly designed by the modiste Adrian had engaged, accommodated her expanding figure while maintaining propriety. The household staff accepted the situation without comment. A young bride expecting a child was hardly scandalous, even if the timing seemed somewhat swift. It was during this period that Rosalind began to glimpse the man behind Adrian's reserved facade. She noticed how he personally visited each tenant family when one of their children fell ill, how he remembered the names of every person who worked on the estate, how he sat up late into the night reviewing the account books to ensure no one under his care went without necessities. She observed, too, the moments when his careful composure slipped. Once, when a letter arrived from London bearing his father's seal, she saw his hand tremble before he broke the wax. Another time, discovering her in the library one afternoon, he had paused in the doorway with an expression of such profound loneliness that her heart ached for him. "Forgive me," he had said quickly. "I did not mean to intrude on your privacy." "It is your library, my lord," Rosalind replied gently. "You could never be intruding." "Adrian," he corrected after a moment. "When we are alone, you may call me Adrian. The formality seems unnecessary in our circumstances. Then you must call me Rosalind." He had nodded, a small smile touching his lips. The first genuine smile she had seen from him. "Rosalind, it suits you. It means beautiful rose, does it not?" "My father chose it," she said softly. He said I was born during the rose season and was as beautiful as any flower in his garden. He was not wrong. The words seemed to surprise Adrian as much as they surprised Rosalind. He cleared his throat, his formal demeanor reasserting itself. I will leave you to your reading. From the partially opened library door, Mrs. Fletcher observed the Marquis depart with a genuine smile transforming his usually serious features, an expression she had not witnessed since he was a boy, before his mother's death had cast its long shadow over Silverton Manor. She smoothed her apron with a nod of approval, her experienced eyes recognizing what others might have missed. The girl will do him good, she murmured to herself, satisfied. She has brought the light back to this house. But something had shifted in that brief exchange. The walls between them had not fallen, but perhaps a door had opened, just slightly. As autumn deepened into winter, Rosalind found herself seeking Adrian's company more deliberately. She began taking tea in the library during the hours she knew he worked there. She asked his opinion on household matters that she could have decided herself. She learned to read the subtle shifts in his expression, the tightening around his eyes that meant a tenant was struggling, the satisfaction when a new agricultural technique proved successful, the barely perceptible softening when he spoke of his mother, who had died when he was 12. And Adrian, despite his determination to maintain emotional distance, seemed equally unable to resist the slow gravitational pull drawing them together. He began timing his return from his estate rounds to coincide with her afternoon walks in the garden. He brought her books he thought she might enjoy. When she mentioned missing the sea, she had spent her childhood in Portsmouth. He arranged for her to visit the Yorkshire coast, accompanying her on a day trip to Scarborough, where the cold December wind whipped her hair and made her cheeks flush with color. "Thank you," she said, as they stood on the cliff overlooking the gray expanse of the North Sea. "I know this adds another journey to your already full schedule." It was no trouble. Adrian's voice was gruff. "You have given up much to be here. The least I can do is ensure you are not entirely miserable." Rosalind turned to look at him fully, studying his profile as he gazed out at the waves. "I am not miserable, Adrian. You have been extraordinarily kind." "Kindness is a low bar for a marriage," he muttered. "Perhaps. But it is more than many women receive from their husbands, arranged or otherwise." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and Rosalind saw something flicker in his gray eyes, something warm and almost hungry before he shuttered it away. "We should return to the carriage," he said abruptly. "The cold cannot be good for you in your condition." The moment passed, but Rosalind carried the memory of that look with her through the winter weeks that followed. By January, her confinement began in earnest. The baby had grown large enough that walking became difficult, and Mrs. Fletcher insisted she limit her activities. A lying-in chamber had been prepared, a warm, comfortable room filled with all the necessities for childbirth and recovery. Adrian became even more solicitous, checking on her multiple times daily, ensuring the doctors he had summoned from York were prepared for any eventuality. His concern touched her deeply, though she tried not to read too much into it. This was duty, she reminded herself. He had taken responsibility for this child, and he was a man who took his responsibilities seriously. The baby came on a bitter, cold night in late January, arriving after 16 hours of labor that left Rosalind exhausted and trembling. The midwife placed the squalling infant in her arms, a boy, healthy and perfect, with a shock of dark hair and eyes that would surely be gray like his father's. Like both his fathers, Rosalind thought with a pang of complicated emotion. "What will you name him, my lady?" the midwife asked. Before Rosalind could answer, Adrian appeared in the doorway. He had been pacing the corridor throughout her labor, Mrs. Fletcher reported later, refusing to retire to his study, despite the lateness of the hour. "May I?" he asked quietly, and at Rosalind's nod, approached the bed. She watched his face as he looked down at the infant for the first time. His expression underwent a transformation, the careful reserve melting away to reveal something raw and unguarded. wonder, tenderness. And beneath it all, a fierce protectiveness that made Rosalind's throat tighten with unshed tears. "James," she whispered. "I should like to call him James after my father, if that is acceptable to you." Adrian reached out one finger, and the baby's tiny hand closed around it with that instinctive grip of newborns. "James Edmund Stratford, Viscount Pemberton," he said softly, giving the courtesy title traditionally held by the heir to a marquisate. "Welcome to the world, my son." The words, "my son," were spoken with such conviction that Rosalind believed them absolutely in that moment. Adrian was not claiming this child out of duty or honor. He had already made the baby his in every way that mattered. "He is beautiful, Rosalind," Adrian said, looking up at her with eyes bright with emotion. "You did magnificently. Thank you." "Thank you," she countered, her voice breaking slightly. "For giving him a name, a place in the world, for being the father he deserves." Adrian opened his mouth as if to say something more, but the moment was interrupted by Mrs. Fletcher bustling in with instructions for Rosalind's care. Adrian withdrew, but not before squeezing Rosalind's hand briefly, a gesture that felt more intimate than any kiss. The lying-in period that followed was both physically demanding and emotionally complex. Rosalind devoted herself entirely to James, nursing him, learning his different cries, marveling at every tiny change in his features. She was surprised and touched when Adrian visited the nursery daily, sometimes sitting quietly in the corner watching mother and child, other times asking to hold his son with a gentleness that contrasted sharply with his usual stern demeanor. "You are a natural father," Rosalind observed one afternoon, watching Adrian cradle the sleeping infant against his shoulder with practiced ease. "I had no expectation of being a father this soon," Adrian replied. "My father was distant, focused on duty and the dukedom to the exclusion of personal connection. I find I wish to do better by James than he did by Nathaniel and myself." It was the first time he had mentioned Nathaniel since their wedding. The name hung in the air between them, a ghost neither had acknowledged for months. "Have you heard from your brother?" Rosalind asked quietly. Adrian's expression hardened. "He remains on the continent. Italy, last I heard, though he moves frequently. My father continues to send him a generous allowance, which Nathaniel no doubt squanders on gambling and other pursuits." Other women, Rosalind understood. The man who had ruined her continued his depredations elsewhere, unpunished and unconcerned. "Does he know about the marriage? About James?" "He knows I married. I wrote to inform him as courtesy demanded. I did not explain the circumstances or the haste." Adrian's voice was flat. "He sent congratulations and a rather expensive gift I donated to charity." The casual cruelty of it, Nathaniel living his life of pleasure while she and Adrian built something real and substantial from the wreckage he had left behind, made Rosalind's chest tighten with anger. But when she looked at James, sleeping peacefully against Adrian's shoulder, the anger transformed into something else. Gratitude, even a strange sort of gladness. Because if Nathaniel had not been who he was, if he had actually married her as promised, she would never have met Adrian. And increasingly, she found herself unable to imagine her life without this reserved, honorable man who had saved her from ruin and given her son a home. The realization troubled her. This was supposed to be a marriage of convenience, nothing more. Developing feelings for Adrian was not part of their agreement. It would only complicate an arrangement that worked precisely because it remained emotionally uncomplicated. Yet, she could not seem to control the way her heart lifted when he entered a room, or the warmth that spread through her when he smiled at something James did, or the longing that kept her awake at night in her solitary bed, wondering what it might be like if Adrian crossed through that locked adjoining door and claimed her as his wife in more than name only. Winter gave way to spring, and James grew from a tiny infant into a sturdy baby with Adrian's serious gray eyes and a determined personality all his own. The household doted on him. The young Viscount was petted and admired by every servant, particularly Mrs. Fletcher, who knitted him an endless supply of tiny garments. Adrian, who had initially maintained careful boundaries, became increasingly hands-on as a father. He insisted on helping with bath time, on taking James for walks through the gardens, often carrying the boy himself when the nursemaid was not present, a sight that charmed the entire staff, on reading to the baby from history texts and poetry collections, even though James was far too young to understand. "It is never too early to develop an appreciation for literature," Adrian said with mock seriousness when Rosalind teased him about it. "He is 5 months old, Adrian. He appreciates milk and sleep in that order." "Then I am preparing him for future appreciation." Adrian's lips quirked in that small smile that transformed his entire face. "One must think long-term in matters of education." Rosalind laughed, and Adrian's smile widened. These moments of shared humor had become more frequent as the months passed, the walls between them gradually eroding through daily proximity and shared purpose. It was easy, Rosalind discovered, to fall in love with a man who treated her with respect and kindness, who devoted himself to her child as if the baby were truly his own flesh and blood, who asked her opinions on estate matters and actually listened to her suggestions, who brought her wildflowers from his rides and left them on her breakfast table without comment. She tried to be circumspect about her growing feelings, fearful of disrupting the delicate balance of their arrangement. But she suspected Adrian knew anyway. She caught him watching her sometimes with an intensity that suggested his own emotions were not as controlled as he pretended. Early June brought with it summer's warmth and a fussiness in James that Rosalind initially attributed to teething. The crankiness, however, did not abate with the usual remedies. By afternoon, what had seemed like ordinary infant irritability transformed into something far more alarming. James refused his milk, his small body growing limp and unresponsive in her arms. By evening, he was burning with fever. "Mrs. Fletcher!" Rosalind's voice cracked with terror as she ran from the nursery. "Send for the doctor immediately! Something is wrong with James!" The household exploded into action. Adrian, working in his study, appeared in the nursery within moments. The doctor, summoned from the village, arrived within the hour but could offer little beyond cold compresses and prayers. Fever in infants was unpredictable, he explained gravely. They could only wait and hope the child's constitution proved strong enough to fight whatever illness had seized him. That night began a vigil that would last 3 days. Rosalind refused to leave James's side, sitting beside his cradle through the endless hours, bathing his fevered body with cool water, trying desperately to get him to take even a few drops of milk. The baby, who had been so robust and healthy just hours before now, lay frighteningly still, his breathing shallow and rapid, his skin hot to the touch. Adrian stayed with them. He did not hover or offer false reassurances. Instead, he sat in the chair opposite Rosalind, his presence steady and solid, taking his turn with the cold compresses when exhaustion made her hands shake too badly to continue. On the second night, when James's fever spiked dangerously high and his breathing became alarmingly labored, Rosalind finally broke. "He cannot die," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Adrian, he cannot die. He is everything. He is innocent and perfect, and he will not die." Adrian moved to kneel beside her chair, taking her trembling hands in his larger, warmer ones. "Do you hear me, Rosalind? He will not die. He is strong. He is a Stratford, and we are survivors. But if he does—" The words choked her. "If he does, it will be my fault. My sin visited upon an innocent child. God is punishing me. Stop." Adrian's voice was fierce, almost angry. "God is not punishing anyone. Babies become ill. It is terrible and frightening, but it is not divine retribution for some imagined transgression. You have done nothing wrong, Rosalind. Do you understand? Nothing. She wanted to believe him, but fear had stripped away all her defenses, laid bare the guilt she had carried since that night in the cottage with Nathaniel. I let him seduce me, she whispered. I believed his lies. I was foolish and weak. You were young and trusting. Adrian cupped her face in his hands, forcing her to meet his eyes. My brother is a practiced predator who has perfected the art of deception. You are no more to blame for what he did than a lamb is to blame for the wolf that hunts it. But James is my son. The words were spoken with absolute conviction. Not by blood, perhaps, but by choice, by love. I chose to be his father, Rosalind. I chose to give him my name, my protection, my devotion, and I will not lose him. We will not lose him. The raw emotion in Adrian's voice broke through Rosalind's despair. She clutched at his hands like a drowning person grasping a lifeline. I am so frightened. I know. Adrian pulled her into his arms, and she buried her face against his shoulder, finally allowing herself to accept the comfort he offered. I am frightened too, but we will face this together. You are not alone anymore, Rosalind. You have not been alone since the day you collided with me on that street in London. They held each other through that long night, united in their fear and their fierce determination to will James back to health through sheer force of love. Dawn broke on the third day to find Rosalind dozing in her chair, Adrian's coat draped over her shoulders. She woke with a start, her eyes immediately going to the cradle where James lay. The baby's eyes were open. The frightening flush had faded from his cheeks, and when he saw his mother, he made a small sound, not quite a cry, but a noise that suggested hunger rather than distress. Adrian! Rosalind barely dared breathe as she reached into the cradle. Adrian, the fever has broken. Adrian, who had fallen asleep in his chair, jolted awake. For a moment, he simply stared at the baby in Rosalind's arms, as if afraid to believe. Then he rose and crossed to them, placing one hand gently on James's forehead. Cooler, he confirmed, his voice rough with exhaustion and relief. Significantly cooler. James, apparently annoyed at having his meal delayed by unconsciousness, began to fuss in earnest. Rosalind laughed, a sound somewhere between joy and hysteria, and pressed her face to the baby's dark hair. He is hungry. He wants to eat. That is a good sign, is it not? An excellent sign. Adrian's hand came to rest on her shoulder, and she leaned into the touch without thinking. He is going to be fine, Rosalind. He truly is. As James nursed with determined efficiency, proving beyond doubt that his appetite had returned in full force, Rosalind looked up at Adrian. He had not shaved in 3 days. His cravat hung loose around his neck, his waistcoat was unbuttoned, and his hair stood up in disordered spikes from running his hands through it. He looked nothing like the composed, impeccably groomed Marquess she had married. He looked instead like a man who had spent 3 days terrified of losing someone he loved. Adrian, she said softly, I need to tell you something. He met her eyes, and she saw that his defenses had been stripped away as thoroughly as hers during the long vigil. The careful reserve was gone. Everything he felt was written plainly on his face: fear, relief, and beneath it all, an emotion that made her breath catch in her throat. I love you, Rosalind said simply. I know that was not part of our arrangement. I know you married me out of duty and honor, not affection, but I cannot keep pretending anymore. These past months, watching you with James, living beside you, learning who you truly are beneath all that careful formality, I have fallen in love with you, completely, irrevocably. She rushed on before he could speak, needing to say it all. I do not expect you to return the feeling. I know you see this as a practical arrangement, nothing more. But I wanted you to know, after nearly losing James, after these 3 days when we faced the worst together, I realized I do not want to live in a marriage built on silence and emotional distance. Even if you cannot love me back, I want honesty between us. Adrian was very still. Then, slowly, he sank to his knees beside her chair so they were eye to eye. "Rosalind," he said, his voice hoarse, "do you truly believe I could spend these months living beside you, watching you mother our son with such devotion and grace, seeing your kindness to the servants and tenants, listening to your laughter, observing your courage and resilience, and not fall utterly, desperately in love with you?" Her heart stopped. "What?" "I have been in love with you since approximately the second week we were married," Adrian continued, a wry smile touching his lips. "Possibly earlier. That day we walked in the garden and you stopped to help Mrs. Fletcher's granddaughter find a lost kitten, getting mud on your new gown without a single complaint. I remember thinking that I was the greatest fool in England for insisting this be merely a practical arrangement. But you never said anything, because we had an agreement." Adrian's hands came up to frame her face, his thumbs brushing away tears she had not realized were falling. "You married me to save yourself and James from ruin, not because you chose me. I would not impose my feelings on you when you had no choice in the matter. It seemed dishonorable to leverage your vulnerability into something more than you had consented to." Rosalind gave a shaky laugh. "So we have both been in love and hiding it, thinking the other wanted only a marriage of convenience? It appears so." Adrian's smile widened into something brilliant and unguarded. "We are both idiots. Speak for yourself. I am a Marchioness. We are never idiots. We are merely temporarily misguided." Adrian laughed, a full, genuine sound she had never heard from him before. Then he leaned forward and kissed her. It was nothing like Nathaniel's kisses had been. There was no practiced seduction, no calculated charm. Adrian kissed her with wonder and reverence and barely leashed hunger, as if she were precious and fragile and infinitely desirable all at once. When they finally parted, both breathless, James made an indignant sound from Rosalind's arms, clearly displeased that his parents' attention had wandered from him. "Our son," Adrian said, his voice full of amusement as he stroked James's dark hair, "has impeccable timing." "Our son," Rosalind agreed, loving how easily the words came, "needs to learn that his parents occasionally require time for themselves. We have years to teach him." Adrian stood and offered her his hand. "But for now, why do we not take him down to the gardens? The fresh air will do us all good, and I find I am eager to begin this second phase of our marriage properly." "Second phase?" "The one where we acknowledge we are madly in love and stop maintaining separate bedchambers." Adrian's eyes gleamed with an emotion that made Rosalind's cheeks flush with warmth. "Unless you object, of course." "I do not object in the slightest." That evening, for the first time since their wedding, they dined not at opposite ends of the long mahogany table, but seated side by side, their chairs drawn close enough that their hands could touch. The conversation no longer revolved around weather patterns or estate management, but instead wandered through childhood dreams and unspoken hopes for James's future. They spoke of Adrian's mother, who had loved roses and music, and of Rosalind's father, whose naval career had filled her youth with stories of distant shores. The silences between them were no longer voids to be filled with polite nothings, but comfortable spaces of shared understanding, the easy quiet of two people who had finally stopped performing and started simply being. When Adrian walked her to her chambers that night, he paused at the threshold. "May I?" he asked, gesturing to the doorway that had separated them for so many months. Rosalind took his hand and drew him inside, closing the door behind them both. "There are no more locked doors between us," she said softly. "Not anymore." It was the true beginning of their marriage, not the ceremony at Marylebone Church with its carefully maintained fictions, but this moment of choosing each other freely, with full knowledge and open hearts. The years that followed proved that love, once acknowledged, could transform even a marriage born of necessity into something truly extraordinary. Adrian and Rosalind settled into life at Silverton Manor with the easy intimacy of a couple who had chosen each other freely. The locked door between their chambers remained permanently open. They fell asleep in each other's arms each night and woke tangled together each morning, often roused by James's cheerful babbling from the nursery as he demanded his parents' attention. As James grew from baby to toddler to small boy, he displayed a personality that combined the best of both his parents, Adrian's serious intelligence tempered by Rosalind's warmth and humor. He had Adrian's gray eyes and dark hair, and as he matured, the physical resemblance to the man he called father became even more pronounced, as if love and daily proximity could somehow shape features more powerfully than blood. Nathaniel's letter arrived when James was 3 years old. Adrian opened it at breakfast, his expression darkening as he read. Without a word, he passed it to Rosalind. The letter was brief and characteristically self-centered. Nathaniel had grown bored with continental life and intended to return to England. He would be visiting Silverton Manor in 3 weeks, eager to meet his brother's wife and heir. Rosalind's hand trembled as she set the letter aside. "What will we do?" "Nothing." Adrian's voice was firm. "He will visit, stay perhaps a week as propriety demands, and then depart again. He knows nothing of the circumstances of our marriage. To him, you are simply his brother's wife, and James his nephew. But when he sees James, he will see a 3-year-old child who bears a strong resemblance to our family. Nathaniel has never shown particular interest in children. I doubt he will look closely enough to recognize any specific features as his own." Adrian was right. Nathaniel arrived in June, as fashionably dressed and charming as ever, and showed remarkably little interest in his nephew beyond a perfunctory pat on the head and a comment that the boy seemed healthy enough. What disturbed Rosalind more was watching Nathaniel interact with Adrian. The brothers were physically identical, the same height and build, the same aristocratic features, but the differences in character were so profound that Rosalind marveled she had ever mistaken one for the other, even briefly. The moment of greatest terror came on the second evening, when Nathaniel, bored by adult conversation, suddenly turned his attention to James. Before Rosalind could intervene, he had scooped the 3-year-old up, holding him at eye level with the careless confidence of someone unaccustomed to children. "Let us have a look at you, young Pemberton," Nathaniel said, studying the child's face with idle curiosity. Rosalind felt her heart stop. Across the room, she saw Adrian freeze mid-sentence, his knuckles white where they gripped his wineglass. 3 endless seconds passed as Nathaniel examined James's features. The gray eyes, the dark hair, the shape of the nose and jaw that mirrored both Stratford brothers so completely. "He has the family eyes, does he not?" Nathaniel commented to the room at large, a smile playing at his lips. "All us Stratford men have them. Father, Adrian, myself, now this little fellow. Quite distinctive." He set James down with the same casual disregard he had shown picking him up, already losing interest. "Run along, nephew. The adults are talking." James, bewildered by the brief attention, scurried to his mother's skirts. Rosalind gathered him close, her hands trembling as she smoothed his hair, unable to meet Adrian's eyes across the room. Nathaniel had looked directly at his own son and seen nothing beyond a generic family resemblance, too self-absorbed to recognize the truth staring back at him. Adrian cleared his throat, his voice carefully controlled when he spoke. "Indeed, the Stratford features breed true." The conversation moved on. Nathaniel never brought up James again, having exhausted his minimal interest in children. But that night, after James was safely asleep in the nursery, Adrian came to Rosalind's chambers, the first time he had done so uninvited. "That was—" he began, then stopped, running both hands through his hair in uncharacteristic agitation. "Terrifying," Rosalind finished for him. "I thought my heart would stop beating." He looked right at him. Adrian's voice was rough with emotion, right at his own son, and saw nothing. "Because he is your son, Adrian. In every way that matters, James is yours. Nathaniel saw a Stratford child because that is what James is. Your heir, your son, bearing your name and raised with your values. She moved to stand before him, taking his face between her hands. Blood means nothing without love and commitment. You know that. Adrian pulled her into his arms, holding her with a desperation that spoke to how deeply the moment had shaken him. I cannot lose him, he whispered into her hair. I cannot lose either of you. You will not, Rosalind promised. We are yours, and you are ours. Nothing Nathaniel does or does not see can change that. Where Adrian was steady and thoughtful, Nathaniel was restless and mercurial. Where Adrian listened with genuine interest to others' conversation, Nathaniel dominated every discussion with stories of his exploits abroad. Where Adrian showed respect and consideration to every servant, Nathaniel was casually dismissive, treating the staff as props in his performance of aristocratic superiority. And yet, watching them together at dinner, Rosalind saw something that made her heart ache for Adrian. Despite everything, despite knowing exactly what Nathaniel was, despite the wreckage his brother had left behind, there remained between them the complicated bond of family. They had grown up together, played together as children, shared a mother who had died too young and a father who had been emotionally distant to both. On the third day of Nathaniel's visit, Rosalind discovered Adrian in his study, staring at the cold fireplace with an expression of profound sadness. He is leaving tomorrow, Adrian said without turning. Returning to London, then likely to the continent again. He finds country life insufferably dull. Rosalind moved to stand beside him, slipping her hand into his. You wish things were different between you. I wish he were different. Adrian's voice was heavy with old grief. When we were boys before our mother died, Nathaniel was not this. He was bright and funny and full of dreams. We used to plan adventures together, imagining all the things we would do when we were grown. What changed him? Our mother's death, perhaps? Our father's indifference, certainly. Nathaniel was always the charming one, the one who could make people laugh, while I was serious and dutiful. Father needed a responsible heir, so he focused all his attention on shaping me into the perfect future duke. Nathaniel was largely ignored, given money and freedom, but no real guidance or affection. Adrian turned to look at her fully. I am not excusing what he did to you, Rosalind. His actions were unconscionable, and he bears full responsibility for them. But I cannot help thinking that if things had been different, if someone had truly seen him and valued him as more than merely the spare, he might have become a better man. Perhaps. Rosalind squeezed his hand. But Adrian, you cannot save him from himself. You cannot force him to want to change or to acknowledge the harm he has done. Some people are content to remain as they are, regardless of the damage they cause to others. I know. Adrian pulled her into his arms, resting his chin on top of her head. It is simply difficult to watch someone you love destroy themselves slowly. The next morning, Nathaniel departed with promises to visit again that both brothers knew he would not keep. He kissed Rosalind's hand with practiced gallantry and tousled James's hair with casual inattention, entirely oblivious to the truth that stood plainly before him. After the carriage disappeared down the drive, Adrian gathered James into his arms and held him close. You look like me, he told his son seriously. Did you know that? Mama says I have your eyes, James replied, reaching up to touch Adrian's face with typical 3-year-old curiosity. You do. Adrian's voice was thick with emotion. And you have my determination and my mother's kindness that I inherited, and your mama's wonderful laugh. You are exactly who you are meant to be. Rosalind, watching them, felt tears prick her eyes. Adrian had long since stopped thinking of James as anything other than his son. The circumstances of the boy's conception had become irrelevant, a footnote in a story that was fundamentally about choice and love rather than accident and obligation. They never saw Nathaniel again. 2 years later, word reached them from the British Embassy in Rome that Lord Nathaniel Stratford had been killed in a duel over a gaming debt. He was 33 years old. Adrian grieved quietly, more for the brother Nathaniel might have been than for the man he had become. Rosalind held him through the worst of it, offering comfort without judgment, understanding that love for family was complicated and did not require the beloved to deserve it. James, who had no real memories of the uncle he had met once at age 3, accepted the news with the philosophical detachment of a 5-year-old. "Does this mean I will be Duke someday?" he asked with interest. "Eventually," Adrian confirmed. "When I am very, very old and you are a grown man with children of your own. Will I be a good Duke? You will be an excellent Duke." Adrian ruffled his son's dark hair. "Because you will remember that a title is not about power or privilege, but about responsibility to those who depend on you." "Like you do," James said with simple confidence. "I want to be like you, Papa." The words were arrow straight to Adrian's heart. He pulled James into a fierce hug, and Rosalind saw him blink rapidly, fighting tears. Later that night, in the privacy of their bedroom, Adrian spoke the thought that had been haunting him since the news of Nathaniel's death. What if James asks someday? What if someone tells him the truth about his parentage? Rosalind considered the question seriously. "Then we will tell him the truth ourselves, that his biological father was a man who made terrible choices, but that you chose to be his father in every way that matters, that love and commitment, not blood, make a family. And if he is angry, if he feels deceived, then we will weather his anger together and remind him that every decision we made was to protect him and give him the best life possible." Rosalind took Adrian's face between her hands. "James is your son, Adrian. He has been since the moment you first held him and called him yours. Whatever challenges come, we will face them as we always have, together." Adrian kissed her with gratitude and love and a passion that had not dimmed in 5 years of marriage. "I do not deserve you," he murmured against her lips. "Nonsense. I am exactly what you deserve. A woman stubborn enough to love you despite your tendency toward noble martyrdom." He laughed and pulled her closer, and they fell into bed together as they had so many times before, their love expressed in touches that had become familiar but never ordinary. The years continued to pass, marked by the ordinary miracles of family life. Rosalind gave birth to 4 more children, Eleanor, then William, then Margaret, and finally little Thomas, who arrived when Rosalind was 32 and declared himself satisfied with his family size. 5 children is quite enough, she informed Adrian after Thomas's birth. "I believe we have sufficiently populated Yorkshire." Adrian, cradling his newest son with the same wonder he had shown holding James for the first time, smiled. "If you are certain, though I confess I would happily have a dozen if each one is as remarkable as these 5. Silverton Manor rang with the sounds of childhood, running footsteps in the corridors, laughter in the gardens, the occasional tears of minor scrapes and major injustices. Adrian proved to be a devoted father, somehow finding time amidst his ducal responsibilities. He inherited the title when James was 7 and his grandfather finally passed, to attend every important moment in his children's lives. James grew into a serious, thoughtful young man with a deep sense of duty and an unexpected talent for diplomacy. Eleanor inherited her mother's warmth and her father's intelligence, showing remarkable insight into human nature, even as a child. William was the adventurer, always climbing trees and exploring the woods, keeping his parents in constant anxiety over his safety. Margaret was the artist, filling the house with sketches and paintings. And Thomas, the baby, combined all their traits in a mercurial personality that kept everyone on their toes. Rosalind, meanwhile, found her purpose beyond the domestic sphere. With Adrian's full support, she established the Stratford Fund for Distressed Gentlewomen, a charitable organization dedicated to helping women who found themselves in circumstances similar to those she had once faced. The fund provided temporary housing, medical care, legal assistance, and job training for women who had been abandoned, widowed, or otherwise left vulnerable. "You are changing lives," Adrian told her one evening as they reviewed the fund's accounts together. In 5 years, they had helped more than 100 women restart their lives with dignity intact. "I am repaying a debt," Rosalind corrected. "You gave me and James a second chance. This is my way of extending that gift to others who need it." "Our debt," Adrian corrected. "We built this together." It was true. Their marriage had evolved into a partnership of equals. Despite the legal and social limitations placed on married women, Adrian consulted Rosalind on all major decisions, valued her opinions on estate management and investments, and made her an equal partner in both their family and their philanthropic work. When James turned 18, Adrian sat him down for a conversation both parents had been dreading. "There is something we need to discuss," Adrian began carefully. "Something about your birth that you have a right to know." James listened in silence as his father explained the circumstances of his parents' marriage. The seduction and abandonment, the chance meeting in London, the marriage of convenience that had transformed into love. When Adrian finished, James was quiet for a long moment. Then he asked, "Does this mean Lord Nathaniel, my uncle, was actually my biological father?" "Yes." Adrian's voice was steady, despite the fear in his eyes. "But James, you must understand." "You chose me," James interrupted softly. "When you did not have to, when doing so complicated your life enormously, you chose to be my father. You gave me your name, your protection, your love. You raised me. You taught me everything I know about honor and responsibility and what it means to be a good man." He stood and moved to stand before Adrian, looking so much like him that the physical resemblance seemed irrelevant compared to the way he carried himself, the way he spoke, the values he embodied. "I know who my father is," James said firmly. "I have always known. Biology is merely an accident of circumstance. Fatherhood is a choice you make every day, and you have chosen me every single day of my life." Adrian stepped forward and placed both hands on James's shoulders, a formal gesture, the kind a duke might make to his heir when passing on a legacy. But his eyes conveyed the unconditional love of a father for his son. "And I know who my son is," he said, his voice thick with emotion and pride that no bloodline alone could ever bestow. "You are mine, James. You have always been mine." James pulled his father regardless of blood, into a fierce embrace. "I would choose you again," Adrian said hoarsely, "every time, without hesitation. I know, Papa, I know." Later, when Rosalind joined them, James hugged her with equal fierceness. "Thank you," he whispered into her hair, "for being brave enough to go to London that day, for giving me a father who actually deserves the title." The three of them stood together in the library that had witnessed so many important moments in their family's history, bound not by biology, but by something far stronger, love deliberately chosen and consistently reaffirmed. 20 years after that cold January day, when a frightened young woman had collided with a serious young lord on a London street, Rosalind stood in the drawing room of Silverton Manor, surrounded by her family. James, now married with 2 children of his own, held his daughter while his wife managed their energetic son. Eleanor was engaged to a promising young barrister who shared her passion for social reform. William had joined the diplomatic corps and was stationed in Vienna. Margaret had just completed her first commissioned portrait, and Thomas was preparing for Oxford, where he intended to study history and philosophy. Adrian, now Duke of Ashcroft, his dark hair touched with silver at the temples, moved through the room distributing gifts and laughter with equal generosity. At 54, he had grown even more handsome with age, the seriousness of his youth tempered by the contentment of a life well lived. Catching Rosalind's eye across the crowded room, he smiled, that small, private smile that was hers alone. and made his way to her side. "Regretting anything?" he asked, slipping an arm around her waist. Rosalind leaned into his embrace, surveying the beautiful chaos of their family celebration. "Not a single moment," she replied honestly. "Every pain, every fear, every challenge led me here, to this life, to you. I would not change a thing." "Not even the beginning?" "Especially not the beginning." She turned to face him fully, lifting one hand to touch his face with the familiarity of decades together. "Because that frightened girl who stumbled into your life gave me everything I have now. This family, this love, this extraordinary life we built from the ruins of what might have destroyed me." Adrian captured her hand and pressed a kiss to her palm. "You saved yourself, Rosalind. I merely provided the opportunity." "We saved each other," she corrected. "You were as lost as I was that day, Adrian, trapped by duty and honor and expectations that had nothing to do with what you actually wanted from life. We freed each other to become who we were meant to be. Then I am grateful every day that you ran straight into me on that London street." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching James show his father his daughter's latest achievement. She had learned to clap her hands, while Eleanor argued good-naturedly with William about something, and Margaret tried to sketch Thomas before he darted away again. This was the future that neither of them could have imagined that day in August 1817. Not the title or the wealth or even the beautiful house, but this sense of belonging, of purpose, of love freely given and generously returned. As the afternoon light slanted through the windows, painting everything in shades of gold, Adrian pulled Rosalind closer. "I love you," he murmured into her hair, "more than I did yesterday, less than I will tomorrow." "That is rather unfair," Rosalind replied, her lips curving into a smile. "Now I shall spend the rest of my life trying to outdo you in romantic declarations." "I look forward to it." Their children and grandchildren continued their celebration around them, the house filled with the sounds of family and love and life. Rosalind closed her eyes and breathed in the moment, committing it to memory, not because she feared losing it, but because it was so perfectly, completely right that she wanted to remember how it felt to stand at the center of something beautiful that she and Adrian had built together, piece by piece, choice by choice, day by day. Outside, the Yorkshire hills rolled away toward the horizon, constant and enduring. Inside Silverton Manor, a family forged not by blood alone, but by love and dedication, celebrated another year of their extraordinary journey together. And in the quiet spaces between laughter and conversation, if one listened carefully, one might hear the echo of a promise made 20 years earlier. A promise that honor and courage and love could transform even the most unpromising beginning into something miraculous. Dear listener, sometimes the worst thing that happens to us becomes the doorway to our greatest blessing. Like Rosalind, you may be facing circumstances that feel shameful or ruinous. Situations where you were deceived, where you trusted the wrong person, where your innocence was exploited. Perhaps you carry the weight of choices that were not entirely your own, or the burden of consequences you never imagined facing. But remember this: your past does not define your future. The mistakes you made or that were made against you do not determine your worth. What matters is what you choose to do next, how you respond to adversity, how you allow yourself to be loved and supported by those who see your true value, even when you cannot see it yourself. Adrian taught us that real love is not about possession or passion alone. It is about choosing someone every single day. It is about seeing another person's wounds and choosing to help them heal rather than exploiting their vulnerability. It is about commitment that deepens over time rather than the intensity that burns hot and fast before consuming itself. If you are struggling tonight, if you feel defined by your worst moment or your deepest shame, know this: you are so much more than what happened to you. You are capable of transformation. You are worthy of love that chooses you deliberately and stays committed through difficulty. You are strong enough to build something beautiful from even the most painful beginnings. Thank you for staying with us through this entire journey. If Rosalind and Adrian's story moved you, if you believe in love that redeems and transforms, please like this video, subscribe to our channel, and share this story with someone who needs to hear it. Your support allows us to continue creating stories that celebrate resilience, honor, and the extraordinary power of love to heal even the deepest wounds. Together, we keep these stories alive.